a lawyer should be disbarred if they allow a VC to do a deal without pro rata rights. And that might be a little strong. They should at least bring it up.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be your host of the VC 10X podcast. And today we have Steve Brotman with us. Steve is the founder and managing partner at Alpha Partners, a NYC based growth equity firm founded in 2012 with over $130 million in assets under management. In this episode, we'll talk about what are pro rata rights, why should VCs always do deals with pro rata rights, ethical concerns over founders not respecting pro rata rights, how Alpha Partners helps VC firms that have pro rata rights but are unable to exercise them due to lack of funds or it being later stage investment that doesn't align with the firm's investment thesis. Alpha Partners provides the capital needed to invest and shares half the carry with the VC firm. This is going to be an insightful episode on the subject of pro rata rights. So without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. Hey Steve, so good to have you on the VC 10X podcast. How are you doing?
I'm well. I'm well. How are you doing? Good to see you and finally meet you.
Absolutely, likewise, and great to have you on the podcast and talk about all things pro rata. That's going to be the major theme for this episode today. So to kick things off, can you just simply give us a brief about what is pro rata and what are pro rata rights?
Sure. So pro rata rights are are fairly esoteric for those who are not in the industry. And I don't know how much of your audience is, are venture capitalists versus entrepreneurs versus just students
Yeah,
of
it's
the
a
game.
mix of both. Yeah, mix of
Okay.
both. Yeah.
Okay. So pro rata rights are kind of interesting, and I'm happy to share my own experience as well. But pro rata rights are a superpower. It's the one superpower that actually VCs actually have, whether they know it or not. It's akin to being able to double down on your winners. But if you think of if you play blackjack or any type of casino card game, it's the one place where you can actually start beating the house. So that's why this is important for investors and venture capitalists and also for entrepreneurs, because you want to have healthy VCs. And so if you think about the blackjack game in particular, a lot of people have played blackjack. You might be familiar that the house typically wins. The odds are sort of stacked against you. But where the player can catch up is when they can double down on their hot hands. So if you flop an ace and the house has a 5, you have the ability to double down on that bet and put, instead of putting, if you have $10, you can put down another $10 and bet in a situation where you're very likely to be have a 21 and the house might be very likely to bust, right? So that's a situation where you have a high probability to double your money on that extra $10, right? Another situation in blackjack is the ability to split cards. So if you get 2 aces, you have the ability to split those aces, and that gives you a higher probability to hit 21 because they're more face cards. And then you might even double down on those, right? And you can even continue splitting and doubling down as many as you like. I think, well, I don't want to get too deep into the esoterica, but the point is that is when you go from losing money to getting close to beating the house, if not sometimes beating the house. And so
Yeah.
that's akin. It's not a perfect analogy, but it is the one superpower that a VC has, that they at an early stage. So if you put down 20 or 30 small bets, what you want to do is put the most amount of money on your top couple winners that are popping up good. You don't want to back your losers, right? And so
Yeah.
pro rata rights are important offensively, but they're also important. So that's why it's so important. If you're a VC and you're not using your pro rata rights, you're going to lose to the house, and that's not a good situation. So what we do is what has happened, unfortunately or fortunately, is that the time to IPO has been extended from 4 or 5 years after investment to 10 to 15 years. That means that these opportunities to sort of double down on your winners, if you will, is no longer in the time frame of your fund. So what do you do 6, 7, 8, 10 years later when you finally get the perfect opportunity to split those cards or double down in
Yeah.
VC parlance? You're kind of SOL as a VC. And so as an early stage fund myself, this happened to me. I was an entrepreneur, founded a company in the mid 90s, in the software company. I was a coder. I worked for Accenture before that. I went back to law and business school and then founded my first company, and then ended up doing seed investing. And one company in particular called Metadata shortened the clinical trial cycle for drug discovery by a year. If you can do that, that's magical. Well, using software, I mean, not using sort of new molecules or anything else, but if just by using software in your existing process, you can save a year out of it. Every day is worth between $1 and $6 million per day. This is a classic case where this bet's working out. I want to double down on this. But 6, 7, 8 years later, you really can't. You can't, partially because your fund doesn't have any money, because years later. You partially can't because you're not a growth stage investor. You're an early stage investor. Your LPs believe in you because you're early stage. I didn't give you money to do late stage. Didn't give you money to do LBOs or public companies or private credit or anything else. I gave you money for early stage. So once it gets outside that window, that gets difficult to do. And so I experienced this firsthand myself at Silicon Valley Venture Partners, and that stuck with me, that I couldn't do this. Be around, and I watched Insight, which, by the way, is a phenomenal firm, and Devin Perek has grown a hellacious, and Jeff Horing, both who I've known for 20 years plus. But that's what they were doing early on. Is frankly, they were going in at the growth stage in software companies and saying, "Hey, why don't let me take your double down hands that have high probabilities of winning?" Right? Makes total sense. Why do the early stages? Now, they're a multi-strat fund and do early stage as well as late stage and all sorts of stuff. And they provide, by the way, they provide a lot of value to their entrepreneurs and LPs. I just want to be clear about that. Devin's speaking at Alpha Market, our summit, our growth equity summit on October 18th, and as well as a few others. But the point is like these are really interesting. These are really not just interesting but important rights that are needed to use offensively. So when you're a VC, you want to make sure. So those are offensive uses. The other aspects, the reason why they exist is because for defensive reasons. A lawyer should be disbarred if they allow a VC to do a deal without pro rata rights. And that might be a little strong. They should at least bring it up. Because not just because they're losing their offensive capability, but they're losing their defensive capability. What do I mean by defensive? So let's say you invest in a company at $10 million and you put in $1 million and you buy 10% of it. Company grows and grows and grows. You're out of money. It's 5, 6 years later. They want to do another round. And let's say the last valuation was 10 million. They're like, hey, how about 5 million? The new investors. And you're like, well, no, it's worth more. Without essentially pro rata rights are minority protection right. What do I mean by that? So that a new investor can propose investing at a $5 million valuation and cram you down. They can actually force you out of the, to reduce your ownership in the cap table. But there's a caveat. They can do that. Let's say the company's going sideways or anything else, but they can do that and the company can elect to do that, but they have to allow you to have your pro rata right of that deal. So if they raise $1 million at a $5 million valuation and you own 10%, they have to give you a right to give you $500,000 excuse me, if you own 10%, they raise another $1 million at a $5 million valuation, they have to give you the right to invest $50,000 and maintain your equity stake, right? So you can value it at
Yeah.
100 million, you can value it at 5 million, but this is a anti-dilution protection that protects minority investors. And you might say, well, screw minority investors, screw minorities. That was a little bit of a joke. Hopefully not
Yeah.
taken out of context. But the point is no, we live in a capitalist and democratic society. And if you don't have minority protection rights in your cap table, um, and you need to have minority protection rights because if you're a minor voice, you should have the right to not be diluted to hell and not have the ability to defend yourself. It's fine for the company to make an economic decision to raise more money. It can't not allow their existing investors. And that's the interesting piece is that, some entrepreneurs are sort of like, well, screw those guys. They're yesterday's news. That's why we have laws in the country, right?
Right.
So there are, um, and look, I understand if a VC is willing to forego those double down rights, they can do that. That's well within their power. They can be nice guys. It's, to not double down on their winners. It's sort of like being at the casino. They can waive their rights and in down rounds not to do that. But this is minority protection rights. These pro rata rights are based on three things. I went to law school, so I'm going to mention them. It's based on common law, case law. It's based on, so there's, even if you don't have anything in your documents, there's case law that says you can sue for pro rata rights. There's also, in the state of Delaware, there are statutory rules about pro rata rights. So again, even if they're not in your documents, you cannot waive pro rata rights statutorily. And then the third piece is in the documents, in the contractual documents themselves. I mentioned this earlier. Most lawyers will tell their existing VCs, no, do not waive your pro rata rights contractually. So most of the time, you have contractual, state law, and case law backing up the VC. And by the way, like I understand entrepreneurs. I was an entrepreneur myself. Like, why do you want to screw the guys that were and gals that were there at the very beginning? What does that say about your future? The other investors might say, yeah, screw those guys. They don't matter anymore. Come with me. But like, if you do that, what does that say about you as someone who wants to back you?
That happens a
So
lot, honestly. That happens. Yeah.
it does happen, but the entrepreneur shouldn't do that. The VC shouldn't concede. The lawyer shouldn't concede. It happens a lot, almost mostly by negligence, mostly by, geez, there's 200 people on my capital call list, my cap table. I'm just going to close the round. If no one yelps, then great, right?
Yeah.
But as a VC, they're stealing. They're not stealing, but the point is they're not treating you as a partner as you should be. It doesn't take that much time to send out a quick note. Your VC is going to respect you for protect. Because by the way, the guy who does the A round, there's a B round. By the way, there's also a C round and then a D round. If you want to signal to your next investor that you're going to screw everyone else, it's not necessarily the best signal to send. By the way, a lot of times they're on your board as well, and they might be on your comp committee. And how you treat people makes a big difference. And usually, we're not talking about situations, that, oh, there's often the excuse, well, this new investor in the B round isn't going to invest unless they get everything. So they're only going to invest 20 million. And if they put in a penny less, they're out.
Right. Yep.
Bullshit. Bullshit. If they
Yeah.
put in, if they only put in 15 million, you think that's going to be the end of the day? You think they're really, after months and months of trudging, then they're going to say, no, screw those guys. We're going in.
Yeah.
Really, if as a VC, I think there's been a bit of a culture of, hey, who can be the friendliest VC ever? But basically, a lot of those VCs, by the way, that VC that puts that $15 million deal in, you think they're waiving their pro rata rights in the C round ever? Not in a
Yeah.
million years
Yeah.
are they waiving those rights. So they'll tell
Yeah.
you to waive yours, but if you want to be a VC in the future, you've got to stand up for your LPs, and it's not at the detriment of the entrepreneur. I've never heard of a single deal that blew up because the existing VCs wanted half their pro rata,
Yeah.
right? I've never heard
Yeah.
that's never happened in the history of the world.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel strongly about this. I think it's for the health of the ecosystem. If you want early stage VCs to exist in the future,
Hmm.
you've got to allow them to participate. So that's my 2 cents, and sticking
Yeah.
with it. So, anyways, I'm very passionate about this topic, as you can tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually a very important topic and isn't as talked about, but every now and then, like, some instances come up wherein some of the earliest VCs who believed in you and like no one would have backed you, they get screwed. And even in case of angels, right? They invested in the idea, right? And now they are not getting their fair share. It just doesn't feel good.
Karma is a bitch. I'm a
Yeah.
big believer.
But like,
I've
yeah.
seen these I've been in situations where the founder screwed me out of my pro rata rights.
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty upset. What am I going to do? Am I going to sue the founders? No. But what I found is that those founders,
Yeah.
if they're willing to screw people over this, they're screwing people over other stuff. They're screwing over their employees. They're screwing over their customers, their strategic partners. What I find is that the karmic, I'm almost glad. I'm almost like, oh, good. I'm glad I don't have to deal with this person in the future in some ways. I'm still
Yeah.
upset, and I wish that it was different, but the cost to an entrepreneur to carve out 10% of the round for their existing is minimal. And,
Yeah.
unless you're at death's door, I
Yeah.
understand if you're at death's door, but honestly, so raise 22 million instead of 20 million.
Yeah.
BFD. So I don't know. I think anyways.
Yeah,
uh,
I understand, totally understand your feeling. But like, is that ever a case that the founder was at the mercy of maybe the bigger investor that was coming in at Series A or Series B, and they wanted it a certain way, and the founder didn't have an option, so it was the only way they can go. That can be the
as I
case.
said, that's a death's door. Like you literally
Yeah.
have one bidder. You literally have one bidder, and they're just like, no, it's our way or the highway.
Yeah.
We're not in, by the way, the last 3 years for you, that it hasn't been that way. Only 10% of startups have been, that's not, it's more, honestly, to the extent that an entrepreneur, I think it's also the VC's voice and the angel's voice. Call those guys up and say, no, I want my pro rata. Call the board. That is your right, not just, as I said, on three different, not just contractually, not just state law, not just on case law. It's for your own good. If you want to continue, I've been in the venture industry for 25 years now. If you want to if you want to be in the industry, by the way, none of those guys who are telling you to waive your rights would ever in a million years waive their rights. So think about that just for 1 second. So it happens, but it only happens because you don't make a fuss, and you don't. And by the way, it's not like it's something that you're stealing or they're doing you a favor. It's your contractual right to have, right? And I'm not saying
Right.
be a pig and demand it all, because
Right.
if 50% of the cap table is owned by insiders and you're raising 20 million, all the insiders can't have 10 of the $20 million round, but five, that should be pretty reasonable. And
Yeah.
I think there's a reasonable level. And again, if you're not every entrepreneur is at death's door. And usually if they're really at death's door, they should go back to the VCs and say, listen, I want to treat, just like if there's a C round and a D round, I'm going to want to treat you the same way. and I think they're going to get a very good response. And by the way, it's always better to raise more money than less. It's always,
Yeah.
John Doerr famously said, always take the appetizer, always take the hors d'oeuvres while they're being served, right? And
Right.
you never know. Let's say this, I've seen this happen too. And SoftBank has demonstrated this in spades. If anything, anyone ever knew about I mean, listen, I don't want to talk ill about anyone, but some of these bigger investors came in and said, look, I'm investing 100 million in. No one gets their pro rata usage. And guess what happened? The next round, where's SoftBank? Oh, they're gone. Oh, so what are you going to do? You're going to crawl back to your and this happened to me on several deals. The entrepreneur crawls back and says, Steve, oh, you're so good. You're so great. We really want you to participate in our next round. What do you think my answer is when he crushes my head on a contractual right I had? What do you think my answer is going to be?
It's a no. Yeah.
No, it's going to be
Yeah.
no, F you, right? And by the way, what about all the other investors that I get phone calls from that person? Like you screw, right? And people, I listen, I don't mean like as a threat. Am I, I'm a private person. The point is that karma's a bitch, and you want to treat people who gave you money. You just never know when you're going to need them again. It's happened probably to the times where I was denied pro rata at the top of the market. I was like, you know what? I don't really want to be in. If it's so tight and it's not a death decision, if it's so tight you want to screw your friends over and you have so much euphoria, from my perspective, that's a negative signal, and I'm glad to be out of that company. But the point is that that's incredibly negative signaling. There is true karma in this business, and by the way, it's not just your existing business. Your existing business has a pretty high probability of failure. I've had entrepreneurs come back to me afterwards for another deal when they denied me pro rata rights, and they have a second and a third deal, and you've screwed all your investors over. What do you think happens then? Oh, yeah, that was because Sequoia made me. They wanted 20 million, and I didn't want to roll them back to 18, right? So like, well, how do you think
Yeah.
if you're going to be in this business for 20, 30 years, and that's I think we're very blessed to be in this business. Um, you really do need to think about the longer term, and
Yeah.
you can't listen to, oh, my new investor, they're great, they walk on water. They told me to screw over all my buddies who helped me from the very beginning. Does that make any sense to anybody? Like, do you even, if they demand that, are they really the right partners? You got to really act like, are they really your friend, or are they really just in it for themselves? Right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, I want to make the moral and ethical and karmic argument
Yeah.
that both entrepreneurs and by the way, VCs owe it to their existing investors to do this
Yeah.
as well. Because if they don't, it's a breach of their fiduciary duty to double down on their best deals.
Right.
So I think to capture upside, as well as downside. And by the way, if you give them up
Yeah.
in the downside situation, you've still given them up. So you can be crammed to shit and
Yeah.
still have given them up, right? And by the way, when cram downs happen, even if you've given them up, the lawyers will make sure you go back. The lawyer will go back to the VCs and make sure they waive in writing, even if they don't have pro rata rights, because it's part of case law, it's part of state law, and you can't take those away because otherwise the company will get sued. It's a you know I throw around sue lightly because I can't even remember the last time a VC firm sued a portfolio company or vice versa. It's very, very rare. We don't, you know what, where the suing happens, it happens in the future, in your next round, in your next company. it's a karmic decision you're making. It's hard to tell someone in the heat of the moment that they're making a karmic error, but I can tell you every entrepreneur that's turned me down for pro rata rights, they've come back to me in future rounds, and they've come after me for new deals that they have, and they wonder why I'm not there, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and maybe you don't need everyone. Maybe, hey, maybe that's not important, but for the fractional amount that you're giving up and the ask of your existing, you're coming from a very principled place. I think both VCs and entrepreneurs, and they have to realize that, it's an ecosystem, and there is sort of that dynamic. But anyways, it's a really interesting topic, and be thrilled to continue this conversation another time, and at greater length. And we work with over 800 VCs
Yep.
that are in 80% of the cap tables of all technology companies. And that's our fun. That's what Alpha does, is we help VCs maintain their pro rata rights, and we share up to half our carry with those VCs. So that's what Alpha does. And so for entrepreneurs and for who have pro rata rights, but it's all in their own companies, but mostly VCs and angels, feel free to reach out to us at Alpha Partners, and we can help you. It's one thing to have them, but if you don't have the money to do them, what's the point? So we provide the money to do that. And so for entrepreneur for VCs and angels that have this opportunity, feel free to reach out to me, Steve at alphapartners.com, or anyone on my team, and we'll get back to you pretty quick. We do focus on growth stage, so it's typically a B round or later in a company north of, say, 10 million in revenue. But we do respond really quickly, and that's really when you want to double down, is in those big inflection point companies. And that's where I've made all my money in my career, and that's where most VCs will tell you, doubling down when on that winning blackjack hand, that's where you make your big money in our industry. And I just want to encourage entrepreneurs, angels, and VCs to work together to create a vibrant system. So
Yeah.
thanks, Prashant.
Absolutely, Steve. This has been a really insightful and an episode filled with wisdom, both for VCs and for founders alike. So thanks so much for coming on and sharing all your thoughts and feelings about ProRata. I'm sure it's going to help many, and I'll be sure to have you on again on the podcast to talk about it in more detail. But this time, thank you for coming on, and I love the model that you're following at Alpha Partners, helping the VCs who are not able to, get their pro rata rights exercised because of the lack of funds or other reasons, or maybe they're not investing in that segment of growth stage. Then it's great to partner with you guys at Alpha Partners and get half the share of carry. So it's great. I'll make sure to put all the links you mentioned in the show notes below so that our listeners can get there easily. Thanks so much, Steve, for your time, and happy investing.
Thanks, Prashant.
Thank you.